Welcome, everyone. I'm going to turn it over to David Pearson, who is a member of the Education Committee and a member of the Contra Costa County Executive Committee and Board. David.
Thank you, Anne. And I wanted to welcome everyone to our final presentation of our education series this year. Tonight is Alternative Practices of Law. It's a big, wide, wonderful world. And I want to thank our sponsors for both tonight and our entire series, DLCCS, DLC Consulting Services, and Diane Camacho, LawPay, and Thomson Reuters. So I will turn it over to our panel now and Marcus Brown. Good luck, Marcus. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the final installment of the education series this year, which is called Your Law Practice Roadmap. So the final piece of that roadmap is alternative careers for lawyers. And the three panelists we have here today have a lot to say about that subject. Let me first introduce Inga Miller. Hi, Inga.
Hello. Hello, Marcus.
Hi. Inga is both a practicing lawyer and a local politician on the Orinda City Council. She was first elected to City Council in Orinda in 2016 and served as the Vice Mayor in 2018 and the Mayor in 2019, where she had to deal with a couple of notable events. One was the PG&E planned blackouts for fire safety. Inga prepared her constituents for that. And also the tragic shooting at the Airbnb Halloween party on Halloween last year. Inga, after that event, helped enact a local ordinance restricting short-term rentals. And since then, she's been working with State Senator Steve Glazer to implement statewide legislation that would allow local jurisdictions to levy heavy penalties and fines on folks who don't comply with those short-term rental restrictions. She's on the downtown subcommittee for the city of Orinda. She's on the board for the Central Contra Costa Solid Waste Authority, also known as Recycle, Inga,
Recycle Smart.
Right, okay, Recycle Smart. And in addition to all that, she has a commercial real estate law practice called Miller Property Law, where she represents individuals and businesses, helping set up their companies and also helping on their real estate deals, including lots of commercial leasing. She is for the past several years, she's been the co-author of the CEB book on retail leasing. In addition to her lawyering and experience as a politician, Inga, before she went to law school, was a newspaper reporter. So she has that experience to bring to the table today as well. Next, we have Nicole Mills. Hi, Nicole.
Hello.
Nicole has been a lawyer and a mediator, and she's now a full-time college educator. Her career started off after finishing Cornell Law. She went into big firm litigation, which she did for 11 years. Then she realized mediation was something she wanted to pursue, so she just quit litigating and started her solo mediation practice. She was always interested in teaching as well, so she started teaching conflict resolution online. She then got offered an adjunct teaching position at JFK Law School, which she took. And then last year, that turned into a full-time position. Let me get the title right. Full-time position as chair of the legal studies program and core faculty at JFKU College of Law. So she runs the entire undergraduate program, including JFK's paralegal certificate program, and she teaches in the law school. So right now she is teaching legal writing to first-year law students, developing a brand new online curriculum, and shepherding JFK through its transition on January 1 to North Central University. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you.
And our next panelist is Dorian Peters. Hi, Dorian. Dorian's career path fascinates me. I'd like to find out more about it personally, but he's been an attorney, namely a prosecutor and a criminal defense lawyer but now he is a police officer with the city of Richmond.
El Cerrito.
Oh, I'm sorry, city of El Cerrito. Sorry about that. There's a big difference, I know, even though they're neighbors. So he's been a police officer for 2.5 years, and starting next year, he will be assigned to the Detective Bureau, where he will conduct investigation of major crimes. Before becoming an officer, he was a criminal attorney for 10 years. He's a state bar certified specialist in criminal law. And he worked as a prosecutor in Contra Costa and Merced counties. He's also worked as a criminal defense attorney in solo practice and with the Gaga McCoy law firm in Danville. He's also active in the Contra Costa County Bar Association, presently the treasurer of the Bar Association, and next year he'll be the president. He went to UC Berkeley and got a master's in business administration from Western Governors University, and he got his JD from Vanderbilt. Welcome, Dorian. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So with that, let's jump right into the discussion. Oh, let me say something about myself. Sorry. I'm Marcus Brown. I'm a real estate attorney. I've just been an attorney my working life, so I'm here to lend my curiosity to this subject. So with that, let's first talk about what we as lawyers, what do we have that transfers well to other career paths? You know, what are our skills or attributes that lawyers have, you know, in terms of education or experience that would transfer well to other careers?
Well, I'll start. Obviously, I teach law, so there's that. That transfers real well. But what I find that transfers exceptionally well are different skills like critical thinking skills and writing skills. But to be fair, I also teach legal writing, so that also transfers real well. Lawyers have a way of sort of breaking down a problem and going through it methodically, which I think also transfers well into any profession you can think of, actually. The ability to sort of issue spot and do critical analysis of a situation can help you really in a variety of different situations.
And so what about the teaching piece, Nicole? Is that, do lawyers make good teachers generally, or do you think that's something that is particular to you?
Well, that's an interesting question. Most of the faculty at JFK are adjuncts, and so they are practicing attorneys. And I have found at various bar events and stuff, when people find out that I work there, everybody wants to, like, oh, if you need a teacher. It feels to me like a lot of lawyers love teaching and love the idea of passing on what they know. It's not a skill set for everybody, certainly. And it is a different skill set, but it does seem to be one that correlates highly with a lot of attorneys. And I think part of that is just wanting that sense of connection with other people and passing on what they know.
Yeah, and I taught adjunct at a community college for a little bit for a couple years out of law school, and that was it helped that I was younger and had a lot of energy for it, but I enjoyed it the little bit I did it.
Yeah, I love it. And I've loved it for a long time. And to be fair, it was always my first choice career. So I kind of made my way back to where I wanted to be in the first place.
Cool. Dorian, Inga, what do you think lawyers are good at that fits other jobs?
Yeah, well, I will second what Nicole said, and I really want to emphasize it because she couched it as she may be biased as a legal writing teacher, but that way of reasoning and just the way that we learn in our initial writing classes, the IRAC method, looking for that issue and the rule and then applying it, and then the conclusion is a way of just dealing with a problem. It's a way of dealing with any problem that we face. And I find over and over again, lawyers make wonderful clients. I have found as a practicing attorney, and I've found that in the city council position, that people with business experience or lawyer experience really bring that sort of ability to analyze a problem, and then that connection with people, that understanding that to get to the result that is the person who is trying to affect the result, they're going to be more successful if they're able to bring people together. And so that negotiating, that sort of the culture of lawyers to be reasonable with one another is just so important to what I find I do as a city council member, whether it's on committees or on the actual city council. And that's not to say that other backgrounds don't always also bring that, but I've found that I certainly was equipped with those skills through my law school training and through my day-to-day training on the job as a commercial real estate attorney.
Dorian, did you have something to say there?
Yeah, I mean, of course I agree with with Inga and Nicole. You know, for me, the legal education really just built a really good foundation to be able to learn things on my own and to be a little bit like independent in terms of researching and in terms of being able to find the answer to problems myself. And so, you know, in law school, you just do so much reading, you know, and quite frankly, a lot of it's not very straightforward, not very easy to read. And you really have to kind of be able to pull out sort of what's important. And of course, you know, when you go into legal practice, you actually realize that when you have treatises and books and things like that, it actually is not as tricky as it is in law school. And of course, all those things transfer over, you know, to my current job, because I still have to do a lot of legal research in terms of criminal law elements, you know, making sure that, you know, we're preparing strong cases, things like that. So overall, I found the legal education to be very valuable and very, very helpful. And I think it's allowed me to, you know, really investigate better and kind of know where I'm going before I go there, which I think has been very, very, very useful.
What do you, great. And then on the flip side, what do y'all think lawyers might be lacking, or which would vary from individual, of course, but you know, are there some things about what lawyers do, or most lawyers do, that might make it a little more difficult to transition into something else and might make the learning curve steeper than for a person with a different background?
Yeah, I could start with that one. You know, for me, I think things that made sort of a transition out harder, and things that lawyers are lacking is, one, I think lawyers, because of the way we're trained, we're taught to solve problems slowly, but to get the right answer. And if you ever move to a position or a job where you need to make very urgent decisions very quickly, that can be tough for lawyers, because lawyers are used to being able to take their time, go to Westlaw, look up the answer. Obviously, if you're like doing law enforcement or something like that, you've got to make decisions in split seconds that have very high ramifications. And so that was one transition point. I'd say that lawyers have a much higher level of risk aversion. And so if you're going into a position where maybe you need to take more bets, or where there's risk involved, I think that can be a tough transition from law. And I also think that generally speaking, not everyone, but I think if you do a heavy trial and litigation practice, especially, lawyers tend to have very poor quality of life sometimes, and work-life balance. And that can have, I think, ramifications for things like health, physical fitness, things like that. And so I think, you know, if you're going into something that's like physically demanding, then that can be a transition point. Because, you know, for me, I had to go to a police academy, which meant lots of running, push-ups, you know, combat skills, you know, being out, you know, in the elements, you know, all different types of weather conditions, things like that. So those are three things that I could think of that actually are probably make it a little bit harder to make a transition, at least into the field that I went into.
So did you start off behind others on the conditioning? People in the academy in terms of your conditioning?
There were people who were way more conditioned than I was, and I was one of the older people in my academy. But, you know, I think the key with the academy is you just don't want to be one of the least conditioned people there. If you can fall anywhere in the middle, you'll be okay. And for me, I knew going in that that would potentially be an issue. And so I was running and, you know, going to the gym and doing all that stuff for probably like a year before I stepped foot in the academy. So even that year, though, kind of put me in the middle of the pack. There were, you know, guys there who had, you know, did CrossFit, taught CrossFit, you know, been bodybuilding for, you know, 20 years, 10 years, things like that. So, you know, that was more kind of what I had to do to kind of just sort of fit in.
Mhm. Because of the physical requirements of being a police officer, is there an age past which you really can't start at the academy?
In the state of California, there is no age. If you can do the job, you can become a police officer. I know federally for people who want to do things like FBI, things like that, there is an age limit, and I believe it is 37.
Great. Inga, Nicole, what are lawyers, a lot of lawyers lacking from the way we have to do our lawyer work?
Well, I would say one of the things that makes it harder to transition to academia is that lawyers are used to making a lot of money, and academia is not where you go when you want to be rich at all. And it is hard to get used to, especially if you're billing out at $400, $500, $600 an hour, and suddenly you're making a lot less. That can be very jarring for some people. And I think that sometimes it leads to people feeling unappreciated, or that they're being taken advantage of, because there's actually a lot of work involved in teaching well, a lot of work with your students that, you know, if you break it down on an hourly rate, you really probably don't want to do that. Let's just say that, because it leads to feelings of unappreciation. And that can be hard for some people to get over, to be very fair. Once you start thinking about things transactionally, I think that it's probably best that you're not in the classroom, because usually at that point, that transaction is not going to favor you spending time working with the students. It's just not, the money's not there. So that can be really hard for a lot of people. And then I think the other thing that can make it hard to transition into academia sometimes is, and it's not exactly the flip side to what Inga was saying about people who are good negotiators and bringing people together, but sometimes lawyers can be a little abrasive and combative, and that does not fly real well in academia. That sort of "I'm better than you" attitude really does not get you very far, and it can take you really far in an aggressive trial practice, but it does not take you very far when you're working in academia. So I think sometimes those are personality traits that people who go into law sometimes have that maybe don't translate well into an academic career.
Really excellent points, I would say, by Nicole and by Dorian. And I certainly can't top those. One of the things that Nicole brought out is just that I think what we're trying to do are make some generalizations here, and we can always, and many of them they can go both ways. We have the good negotiators and the people who could be civil, and then that side of us that can be very kind of advocating for our client. And then the whole idea of risk aversion. So I think depending on the position we're going into, that can matter more or less, that difficult. And I certainly see that with the city council position. That's an area where one has to put aside that sort of that risk aversion. And certainly the idea that one is going to be making money. Ours is kind of it's a free voluntary position that we do for the city of Orinda. So I certainly would not quit your job to make the same salary. And I think that that's true for people who do it with, I certainly have no further political aspirations. Some people do though, and it is a great way of getting into a higher office, or if you're doing it, you know, I know one of the supervisors in San Francisco, at least one of them was previously an attorney. So, and those are certainly paid jobs and they're full-time jobs. Our county supervisors are full-time jobs in Contra Costa. And those salaries are, you know, a fraction of what what certainly our county supervisor for Orinda, Candace Anderson, I have to imagine it's a fraction of what she was making as an attorney before. So it really is a financial adjustment that people need to keep in mind, but can also be a really rewarding one. So I think these are all that, so it goes to the flexibility and just the ability of the individual attorney to be flexible and to kind of think of these things that we've had as lawyers, whether it's a good salary or the ability to make our own hours. You know, most of these jobs, whether we're teaching or the city council or law enforcement, we all have jobs to do tonight, for example, and in our law careers, we would get to probably call it a day sometime between 5 and 7 p.m. But those of us here tonight will not be calling it a night until at least after 9, I suspect.
I wonder about sometimes, you know, in my experience, lawyers end up not practicing, you know, practicing law isn't really a team activity, even if you're in a larger firm or organization. You know, each file or each project tends to be assigned to one lawyer who's working kind of by themselves. What does each of you think about transitioning into something that's more of a team environment? And Inga, I imagine, you know, working with the city, that's very team oriented or more collaborative in terms of your policy making and other things that you and the other council people want to get done.
On mute. Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's a really fabulous point. And just in as a lawyer, I certainly am a silo. I love to work by myself. I don't like to work as a team of lawyers unless it's on a specific project. I like to have my autonomy. I think I'm my best lawyer when I have my own kind of firm. And of course, that's totally opposite how it works in any sort of community politics or community building. And so it's a really important and kind of an interesting, I find it very interesting. It's a totally different experience than working as a lawyer where you have total autonomy. You're constantly making, or I'm constantly making kind of compromises and what I see as the best outcome in order to sort of achieve the result that others are seeking. And I think that is a very different aspect than our regular lawyering. And it's a good thing, and that we're kind of breaking out of that isolation that I think leads to a lot of problems that lawyers ultimately face. You know, we are required to go to, you know, every year our CLE requirements include substance abuse, aversion, or, you know, all these different issues because lawyers do have a lot of stress in their jobs, and working as a team can really, I think, alleviate a lot of that stress. And it is an adjustment to figure out how to do it.
So how were you able to adjust to more team-oriented function?
I think you learn as you go. You know, if you kind of go in, and I was a brand new council member, so I was joining the city council, and then I was also, as part of my position, I was immediately appointed to serve on Recycle Smart, the Central Contra Costa Solid Waste Authority. And that is an entity made up of 2 members of each of several Contra Costa jurisdictions, and half of them were all lawyers. And so I think that was a wonderful mentorship area to see how all of us would read the documents, read the contracts, see very, very complex and difficult issues, and kind of all sort of hash it out around the table, and also be representing our community. I would say that was a wonderful mentorship opportunity, and just it's sort of, or experience, learning by doing, both of those things. And I think that will happen for anybody who is interested in being in local politics. They join their city council, and then you're going to be working with committees and you're just going to learn by doing and sort of seeing. And, you know, I don't think I was super aggressive at trying to impress my position on people right away. I was sort of watching and kind of seeing how it was done. And I think it was a really rich experience.
Yeah, I would say actually what I found interesting is I got to use all of the great skills I learned working on my own, because I had my own mediation firm for like 11 years. So I worked completely by myself. And so the head of the undergrad legal studies program is one person, and you run the program by yourself. And so I was very well prepared to take that on by myself and sort of trust my own gut and figure things out and do that. But being a core faculty member is very definitely part of a team. And you're instantly like Inga was, I was on committees, on admissions committee and a bunch of other committees that I got put on, faculty senate. And so suddenly I'm like on all these teams and working together. And then shortly after I started, the JFK announced that we were going to be transitioning to NCU. And that opened up a whole host of teams. I'm probably on 800 meetings a week with different teams at NCU to facilitate the transfer over. And so, where at JFK we have like 1 or 2 people doing things, they have massive teams doing things because it's a much bigger school. And so it's been really fun to get to know everybody over there and to get to work with a team of people instead of just being the only person who had to do things. And quite frankly, I'm very much looking forward to that in January when we join North Central, is having all of those other people around and having all those teams that you can rely on. And it helps that they really truly are, they have a real team approach to things. They actually do work together incredibly well. So, you also stand the chance of going into we're going to say it's teams, but it's really not teams, and everybody's really going after each other. And that's not at all what happened. So I feel very fortunate that, I got to use all of those skills that I built as an attorney and as a solo to get my work done, but also that I have the ability now to be with a team of people. And I'll be very honest with you, I've worked by myself at home for 11 years. And I was so happy to be going into an office. And then COVID shut my office down and I was back in the exact same chair I'd sat in for the last 11 years. And I really, really miss being in an office with other people around that I can just sort of walk over to their offices and start talking to them. So that part was a little sad. That got ended prematurely for me.
So to each of you, let's talk about just your individual pursuits, and how does one pursue each of those things? We have local politics, college education, and law enforcement represented. Who'd like to start? Dorian, how about you?
Sure.
Talked
So just
already. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So to get into law enforcement, in California, it's pretty simple, but it's pretty involved. I say simple because you can go online and find the steps, but then each step takes a lot of time, energy, effort, things like that. So, there's a couple ways you can go about it. The first thing that you really have to think about is, like the training. So everyone in California who's a peace officer has to go through peace officer training. And there's sort of the initial fork in the road you've got to kind of figure out is, do I want to put myself through that training, which usually takes 6 months full-time work, as well as lots of out-of-pocket costs? Or do you want to apply to an agency that's willing to pay you to do that training, as well as provide that training for you? And in our area, and actually in most areas, usually the agency that's going to be putting the most number of people through an academy while paying them is going to be the sheriff's department. And I think that's because they hire more people than any one city because they do patrol as well as custodial and courthouse functions, and also they tend to run the academies. So so you have to kind of figure that out. For myself, I did the academy on my own, and I paid to do it. And the reason I did that is because for sort of ethical reasons and so on, I didn't want to be applying to be paid to do something that could have been viewed as being adverse to my clients at the time, because I was doing criminal defense work immediately prior to going into police work. Furthermore, I felt like with my background, I felt like I would have a better chance of getting hired by putting myself through, because I felt like with such a unique background, like while you might think, oh, like you have all these degrees, you have all these backgrounds, like it's a pretty not typical background for a police officer. And so I felt like, you know, when you're asking someone to sort of foot the bill for you for 6 months, you know, for them, they may think of me as maybe coming in as to sort of dip my toes in, experiment, things like that. So I felt like in order to be competitive in the job market that I needed to show some commitment to it. And my way of showing that would be to go to the police academy. After you go to the police academy, then you just do sort of a normal job application process. You know, you apply to these departments. It's just like any other job application process. You come in for an interview. It's a little bit more structured because it's usually you know, governmental agencies hiring you, and they have to ask you everyone the same questions so they can rate you comparatively. And then after that, if you get to the next stage, you may have a second round of interviews, but then you have to go through like psychological testing, and then you have to go do medical testing, and you know, you have to do kind of a physical, both like in the medical sense, and you have to go do like a physical skills type of demonstration, and sort of if you cross all those things, then you can get hired. And then once you get hired, you have to go through somewhere between, you know, 2 to 6 months of what they call field training, which is when you're paired up with another officer who's kind of, which is basically kind of on the job training where they're showing you how to handle calls and how the agency does things and sort of how things work on the back end. And so that's kind of the process. I mean, the you know, before you get hired, even to start field training, that whole process can take, you know, 2 to 3 months to over a year. And then the field training process, like I said, could take 2 to 3 months to 6 months, depending on how fast you go through it. So it really is kind of it's not something that you can kind of go into lightly because there's a whole lot of steps you have to cross, but but at least the path is fairly defined, right? You don't have to go out there and wonder, what do I do to become a police officer? That's pretty well set out. It's just a matter of doing all the steps.
Does your law background, does it make you more competitive to be hired once you go through the academy and qualify, so to speak?
I believe so. I had a somewhat of a unique experience. I think generically speaking, I think before I went to the academy, I believe it was a disadvantage because I think that they don't want, again, risk paying someone for 6 months for someone who may not stick around. And I think that, you know, because my transition is so unusual, I actually think it was more of a disadvantage at first. Once I went through the academy, I believe it was an advantage because I think people said, okay, this person is actually serious about this. And I think that they thought, you know, my background would be helpful. I think the background, though, at least my personal background, was a little bit of a double-edged sword because I had done prosecution work as well as defense work. And, you know, I think police work, you know, I think, you know, there could be some suspicion toward folks who worked on the other side or like helping the guys that police are trying to arrest or get prosecuted. So I definitely think that was an issue for me. So it can really work both ways depending on your specific background.
Thanks, Dorian. Inga, so how did it go for you getting into local politics, and how does someone get started?
Right.
For some local politics.
It's a great question, and it's much easier than becoming a police officer. You just you file papers to run for city council or whatever the office is, and you run for election. And so I'd say it's a much simpler process. And in my case, it was actually a member of our Contra Costa Bar Association was a member of the Orinda City Council, and she had done it for years and was really hoping somebody else might run for her seat, and so that she could pursue other things. At that point, she'd done it for many, many years. And so, you know, and she kind of told me about, you know, there was a great experience. I think we had a very short conversation about it. It wasn't too in depth. I should have asked a lot more questions. And that's what I learned, is just all those kind of steps that Dorian says for purposes of becoming a police officer. They can apply to an election too, as well as to getting elected. Certainly not with the the importance that goes into going to the police academy or anything like that, but just the little steps like finding endorsements, people who in the community who will put their name behind yours, fundraising, putting out literature, kind of dealing with the stress of it all, walking door to door, kind of all those little tips are things that people can read in a book. I'm sure there's plenty of them out there that just sort of list these and would make the process a lot easier. I think probably for anyone who's thinking about it and watching this, it's a great idea to contact me or just somebody else you may know that's that's an elected official, whether for your own city or your county supervisor or wherever, because there is a lot of kind of learning that can go into it as you're going and trying to figure out how you navigate the election process. I found it to be quite stressful and to take up a lot of my day of just sort of doing it on the fly. And it was fine for a small community like Orinda, where, you know, there's only a few candidates running. It's quite the opposite from, say, Richmond, where I think that's our biggest city, is one of our biggest cities in Contra Costa County. And Richmond always has a huge number of candidates. I can't remember how many were in this one, but it was like so many people. So it's different in Orinda, fewer people, certainly a much smaller community. So it's not as competitive, but still it's quite an effort, and you have to get that fundraising going or put your own money in or a little of both. And it's a fun process, definitely. And I think once you're on the city council, then you kind of have a sense of that and what it would take to, if your goal is to go to the, you know, higher office, you kind of get a sense for what that is at the next level up.
Are you able to talk about any aspirations you may have for that?
You know, I will be really honest. I don't actually have any. I'd never considered running for public office before our Contra Costa Bar Association member asked me. So, you know, and it's not something where I have further aspirations. It's really great. I love representing our small community. It's not something where I kind of, you know, want to make those sacrifices financially to kind of pursue it at a higher level, because it really is a huge cut into your salary if you make it full time, plus the costs of campaigning. And, you know, I think that everybody really puts a lot of themselves, a lot of their time, and a lot of their money into those campaigns. And so it really is, it's a pretty expensive endeavor. So I think I've taken it as far as I can, for me personally. And I certainly have a lot of respect for those who are willing to give even more of themselves and make it a full-time commitment.
Marcus, you're muted.
Thanks. How does one get into education, Nicole? College education.
That's an interesting question. For me, I can tell you how I got into it, which I don't think was the normal way, to be completely honest. So since this is alternative careers, I had an alternative path. I was mediating, and like I said, I always wanted to teach. And I was looking around on a job board, and that wasn't about education at all, but they were advertising for conflict resolution professionals to teach at a graduate level psychology program. And it was an online program. And I was at the time a little bit like, well, online education, that can't be that good. But then I was like, well, where do you think you're going, lady? And I was like, so I put my hat in the ring. I was like, well, I'll try, because I do want to teach. I want a chance to teach, and that will allow me to do it in a flexible way. Since I didn't have any path to getting into a classroom at that point, I was like, well, then this will allow me to at least teach and have some fun. I literally looked at it like, I just want to teach. I don't really care. And I started teaching at a graduate level psych program, which was interesting because I was the only person there that I could tell that didn't have a PsyD or a PhD. So everybody kept calling me Dr. Mills, and I was like, no, I'm not. But they let me in, and I gave them a completely different outlook on these things than the psychologists did. The psychologists were looking at it from a very, psychology based conflict resolution. I was looking at it a little bit more practically. And I learned so much about the psychology of conflict resolution from teaching there. It was amazing, and I loved it. I also learned that I really like teaching online, and that it was a lot of fun. So fast forward, I was introduced to Lisa Hutton by our own Ann Wolf. Thank you very much, Ann. Lisa and I had a great conversation over at JFK, and I had added in family mediation to my mediation practice. We were talking about that. She needed somebody to teach family law in the paralegal program. And I was like, ooh, a chance to get into an actual classroom. I'll do it. At the same time, they were trying to now move to get some more things online. So I had all of these skills that I brought with me. And it really was a matter of being the right person in the right place at the right time, because I had all of that skill teaching. I had been trained on how to create online classes. I knew how to put them together, because I'd been doing that for like 10 years at that point. And so when the full-time position with the paralegal program came up, she offered that to me, and I jumped on it. And what was interesting is that was on a Monday, and on Wednesday we were on a plane to the very first online teaching and legal education symposium in Colorado. So it was just perfect timing all around. And that's sort of when I started to learn about the move online. Shortly thereafter, I learned about going to, NCU, and that we were, as a consequence of moving to NCU, which is a completely online education, we were going to take our program completely online because the California State Bar had recently approved CalBAR accredited schools for online education. So for me, it all started with me being willing to put myself out there in a way that I hadn't foreseen, for fun, because I wanted to, because it was important to me to teach and to just do something that I was passionate about, and without any real expectation of what would come from it, to be fair. And I loved it, and it sort of, everything sort of spiraled. And so for me, it was the combination of putting myself out there teaching online, putting myself out there mediating, which I also loved. Those things all came together to basically get me my first full-time job in academia, which was working for the legal studies program at JFK. And so, I don't know that that's the normal route into academia. I know that because JFK is the school it is, because NCU is the school it is, publishing is not as important. I know that generally, though, in academia, if you want to get any kind of permanent or real full-time position as opposed to adjunct, they want you to publish. They want you to do academic writing. I know that that's very, very important for a lot of places. But if you're just interested in teaching as an adjunct, because you think it will be fun, because you'd like to pass that on, I highly recommend, we have quite a few law schools in the Bay Area that you can choose from if you want to be in a classroom. And I know several people in the Bar Association are adjuncts at, Berkeley and other institutions. And so, I highly recommend it. I really do. I think it's a great way to give back. It's a great way to sort of open things up. And then, interestingly, both of the career paths that I sort of followed, mediation and teaching, can be the kind of things people set themselves up for during retirement to have a little extra income. So a lot of people will keep their day job and open a mediation practice, because it takes a while to build that up, and be mediators after they retire from the practice of law, or they'll be adjuncts after they retire from the practice of law. And so again, both of those are things that you want to start doing way ahead of time, mostly just because you love it, because it builds up that resume, and then it puts you in the right place at the right time sometimes to sort of go after what you really, really want. So.
Thank you. Let me jump in here really quick and mention that we will have some time for questions in about 10 minutes or so. And for anybody who has questions, just go ahead and use the Zoom chat function rather than the Q&A function. Just stick it in the chat. We won't get to it for another 10 minutes or so, but feel free to type those questions in at any time. So what do you all think some or what did you find when you either added on to your career or sort of switched careers? What was something lacking in just being a lawyer or in your law practice and or mediation practice?
Well, I
Or was it-
quit my law practice to open my mediation practice.
Right.
And that
Right.
was a wholesale change that I did. To be fair, I went and took my 40-hour mediation course because I was super behind on my MCLE. And I was sitting there taking it. And I was sitting there taking it, and I just realized that it was so much more aligned with my personality and the things that I wanted to do. And I realized that that was what I really wanted to do. Like literally, it was one of those things that I came home from one of the classes one day, and I said to my husband, I said, I think this is what I want to do, like full time. And probably a few months later, I wound things up, and I just quit practicing litigation and opened up my mediation practice. And it was much more aligned with my personality and the way that I approached problems and the way that I approached people. So it was a really good switch for me.
Well, it's the rare case, I think, where litigation perfectly fits a person's personality.
That is a fair statement.
So, what about for you, Dorian? Were you missing something in practicing law, or was it more of just something about law enforcement that motivated you, or maybe it was both?
Yeah. Well, I think, I had done 10 years of criminal litigation, and I think certainly toward the back end of the litigation, I think I felt sort of the burnout that comes with handling very heavy cases and defending people of very, very serious crimes. And, I think I knew that my time was kind of up as a defense attorney when, I went to, one of the things you have to do is go to the jail if you have clients who are in custody, and, you got to keep folks updated on their cases and convey offers from the DA and, talk to your clients and things like that. And I remember, just driving to MDF, parking, and just sitting in my car for a long time before going in, like 30 minutes to an hour, because I just didn't want to go in and like give more bad news to like another client. And, in all credit, like, in all fairness, they many times deserve the bad news based on their conduct and so on, but it just didn't feel good to always be the deliverer of that bad news. And, I worked with amazing people. I actually love the firm I worked with last. That was Gagan McCoy, and I worked with Michael Markowitz and Bill Gagan, and they were both fantastic teammates, fantastic lawyers, and quite frankly, I had the time of my life working with them. The hardest part of switching over to doing law enforcement was, telling them that, I had to go and do something else because they were really great friends and partners. But it was just I think just the nature of the work. And I think also, I think that I tend to be a more practical, like hands-on person. And I think my viewpoint and personal viewpoint, I think that particularly as it relates to criminal matters, I think kind of what happens in court is very, very different than what's happening in the street. And I think that there's a bit of a disconnect. And I think court tends to be very formalistic, very legalistic, very slow moving, and very disparate outcomes, very not empirical. And I think I grew some level of frustration with that process on both sides. And I think as a police officer, it's not empirical, but I will say that it's very practical. It is very pragmatic. You get to solve problems in the moment, and you get a lot more interaction with people and the public. And I think you have at least the opportunity to be able to make a very sort of direct difference in people's lives that you don't get when you're sort of stuck in an office or in court all day. So for me, those were some of the reasons why I made the transition. And I'm, 2.5 years later, happy that I did.
So, Inga, it sounds like you may have jumped into Orinda politics because that door opened for you, but was there something in just being a lawyer that made you say, I need to add something else to the mix here?
I really didn't have that feeling. I I was in a little bit of a different place. I already had a board position that I sort of gave up to do the city council. I think if it wasn't for that, I probably would have felt that something was missing. So I was already kind of giving back quite a bit of my time through that nonprofit. But I do think that it does that giving back part, right? And to be part of the community. And I think that that's something that a lot of lawyers who don't have any of the opportunities that we've discussed here today, sometimes that is some of the frustration that people feel mid-career when they're sort of feeling like, what am I doing? My job isn't fulfilling. This career isn't fulfilling. I think having that sort of community aspect, being on a council or something like that can fill that, and certainly does for me, that feeling that I'm giving back the privilege that I was given by being able to go to law school. I'm giving that back to the community and to other people to kind of pay that back. And I definitely receive that from it for sure.
What are some, so Dorian already talked about, sort of took us through, you know, the moment when he realized he should maybe look at switching careers. But what are some, Nicole and Inga, are there signs you think that lawyers might run into in terms of maybe it's time to change? What do you think about that?
I'll jump into that one, and I'm sure Nicole will have better items too to this one. I think that when one is feeling frustrated, if somebody's feeling frustrated every day or feeling depressed or feeling that they're not getting something out of it, that they're not waking up every day and saying, I get to go and be a lawyer, then it's time to look for something else or to add something. And I certainly I know that this was said to us when we were sworn in, that to look at it as a privilege that we got to get up every day and practice law. And I feel that every single day. And I think if we get up one day and we don't feel that, or you don't feel it for a week or whatever, it's time to at least kind of dip the toe in that pool of, is there something else I can either add or change? Because it's a really hard job. And if we're not getting out of it something, then we should be adding to it or looking to change, is my advice on that one.
Yeah, I think frustration is a big key warning sign. I know that for me, I was sitting in that mediation thing and I did make this realization that this was more in line, but it came upon a foundation of frustrating events happening, dealing with an opposing counsel that was just obnoxious for obnoxious sake, who would not do anything, even when it was in their best interests, if it gave us anything. Dealing with a pro tem who just got the ruling completely wrong, and it ended up costing my client $10,000 for us to get that turned around for them. We got, I remember one of the last cases that I worked on, we got probably the best result we could have. We got something dismissed with prejudice. I mean, it was a wonderful result. And I was so sad because it was a family and they were torn apart by that process and they were never going to come back together. And I thought, I just don't think that's what their mom wanted. And, so legally we got this fabulous result, and I just was so saddened by it. And so, all of those things built on each other, so that when I was sitting in that mediation class, I was like, here's a way to bring people together. Here's a way to help people get off this wheel where, you're dependent on who's sitting behind the bench that day to see if they get it right, or spending all of this money because you don't have a choice anymore, because now you have to spend $10,000 more to get something turned around. To me, I just found mediation to be incredibly empowering. And I think that was part of what I found was missing in the practice of law, was that I felt like the practice was disempowering all of the clients. And then ultimately ended up calling my mediation Empower Mediation for that reason. But I felt so inspired by how empowering that process was, to give that decision-making back to the clients, and to do it in a way that encouraged people to come together and actually solve their problems. And, I thought often about that family, about whether or not that would have had a different outcome if I'd had that training, like prior to that case, and I understood the process of mediation better. And so for me, I just thought, I just don't think this is working for me. And it was that frustration over and over and over again in different areas that sort of put me in the place of being receptive to that, that moment in the class of, this is not working for me anymore, but this might really work. So I do think that when you're feeling frustrated constantly, that's something you need to think about.
Thank you so much for sharing. So let's turn to some questions. We have about 15 minutes left. We have a question about whether the attendees could reach out directly to the panelists. So I'll just leave it to each panelist if you want to type in some contact info into the chat room, or anyone can. I'll put my email in there too, and if someone wants to ask for someone else's contact information through me, we can do it that way. And then we also have Teresa Hurley would love to hear a day in the life from each of the panelists. So we could probably do that for her, maybe. So Nicole, day
Yes,
in
sir.
the life. What's your typical day?
Well, it's interesting now that we're on COVID world, it's a little different. And right now, because we're in the middle of transition, a lot of my day is involved in meetings facilitating that transition, and also in working with our subject matter experts to get classes put together. I do a lot of things like scheduling classes and making sure that we have teachers to teach all of them. This is all in my capacity as chair of the legal studies program. I take a lot of emails from students, both in the paralegal and in the law school. And a lot of what I do is talking to students, helping them solve problems, trying to see if I can reach out to the right person to help them get to where they need to get to. And so I have a lot of time that I spend talking to and working with students on various different things. Sometimes it's scheduling or financial aid or dropping a class, or sometimes it's more subject matter. For my students that are in my legal methods class, we'll have a Zoom about, how to do legal synthesis or things like that. And then like tonight at 6 o'clock, I have class. So I will be, logging out of one and logging into another instead of actually seeing people. But yeah, we have class tonight from 6 to 7 because our program is sort of designed for working people. So classes are at night. So sometimes, like Inga said, sometimes I'm working till, late in the evening. And typically it starts around 9 a.m. So, if I can be disciplined and start at 9 and end at 6, that's what I try to do. But on days when I teach, I cannot do that. And sometimes I have students who work full time and they can't meet me at any other time except for like 8 o'clock at night. And so a lot of what I do is to be flexible for them. So yeah, and I mean, teaching legal methods may not be everybody's cup of tea, but I love teaching writing, and we are in the middle of, get ready to cringe, everybody. We're in the middle of our memo project. So they're all writing their very first memo, and I think they hate it, and which means they're doing it right. So yeah, tonight we're going to be working on editing and revising. That's what I get to do tonight.
Great, thanks. Inga, what's your typical day? Up, you're on mute.
Yeah, that there isn't a typical day. That's one of the things that's been the hardest for me, and that I miss the most about just being just a straight lawyer is just the rhythm to the day, the very easy sort of, you start and end. And I don't think that there are 2 days that are the same. So much like Nicole, I'll be signing off of this and going directly into a closed session for a city council meeting, and then we'll go directly to a city council meeting. And we have no idea when that ends. Sometime, hopefully tonight, not tomorrow morning. And it's being flexible for the constituents who work and who have all kinds of different needs. And so, everybody has my cell phone number. So yeah, I take the calls when I can, and when I can't, I'm calling people back. And there's really no 2 days that are the same. There's a lot of night meetings, a lot of early meetings. And then there's fitting in the law practice in between. So I definitely encourage folks to accept a lot of chaos if they're going to kind of take on something like this in addition to their regular law practice.
What's the day in the life of Dorian Peters?
I know it sounds so cliche, but there really is no typical day, but I'll try to walk you through kind of sort of some things that are typical. So right now I'm working weekend nights patrol. So my schedule is like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and sometimes Monday. My day starts at 6 p.m. and it ends at 6 a.m. So usually I sleep roughly from 7 or 8 till 2 or 3. Then I get up and eat breakfast and have tea in the morning. And by morning, I mean afternoon. And then I actually live very close to my workplace. So I usually walk to work and locker room, switch clothes, so I get out of a casual clothes and I put on my uniform and then we go and do something called briefing. And at briefing, we pretty much, it's like a meeting with our whole team, and we learn about things that may have happened while we were gone. If we were on our days off, that may be 3 or 4 days of things. If we were there the previous day, that just may be the 12 hours we were sleeping. And then we go out and we do a mixture of proactive policing as well as responding to calls for service. You never know what's going to happen on any given night. Especially with the pandemic, there have been nights where we've only gotten a handful of calls for service and they were only minor things like, noise complaints, suspicious people, dogs barking, things like that. And there are other nights where we've responded to gunfire, stolen cars, had pursuits where we were chasing cars down San Pablo at higher than freeway speeds. It just you never really know what you're going to get. Sometimes there's a call in another city that sometimes spills over into your city, and sometimes you don't even know, but you just see kind of like the aftermath of it. So, or sometimes things happen in another place, and then you see something in your city that seems related, but then maybe it isn't. Things can happen really quick in police work. So you really don't know what you're going out there to do, but you're going out there to try to stop crimes from happening and to try to do some proactive policing and to try to help anyone who needs help. So,
and then following up on that, Dorian, we have a question for you, which is, does law enforcement allow for work-life balance?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I actually personally think it works. There's more work-life balance in being a police officer than there is in being a lawyer. And I'll explain. So let me just get the bad out of the way first. The hours are weird, right? So I work weekend graveyards. I actually had enough seniority that I did not have to work that. But it's just, I prefer to do that. And that really does throw a monkey wrench in your social life. And if you're trying to do anything in the morning, even on my off days, because of my sleep schedule, sometimes I get up and only have like a few minutes of daylight or a few minutes of business hours, which pre-pandemic wasn't that big of a deal because I could still get up and in the afternoon and evening get a lot of chores done. But a lot of the businesses start closing a lot earlier when the pandemic happened. And so a lot of times I get up and I only got like an hour or two to like do everything that has to be done on sort of my days off. So that's a little tricky. In terms of hours worked, the thing about being a police officer is you are not exempt from overtime laws, which means that you actually work 40 hours a week. And if you have to work more than that, they have to pay you a lot more money. And so what that means is that most of my work weeks are 40 hours a week or relatively close to that. There are times where I have to go to court. I've got to go to training, things like that. Or sometimes there's a major incident and they need help and you get called in. But those things are not all that common. And so as a lawyer, I routinely worked 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and I was not paid anything extra to do that. and clients called at all hours of the night. People got arrested at nighttime. I had to deal with that, help clients. So I personally have a much higher quality of life working as a police officer because it's so many less hours worked overall. And when I'm home, I'm completely off of work. Like, I don't have to answer my phone. I mean, I do have to answer my phone, like if it's like someone really important to my agency calling me, but it's not, that doesn't happen on the regular basis. Whereas as a lawyer, that happened on the regular basis. So I actually think the quality of work life is actually pretty high, because when you go home, you are home, and that's kind of it. So I'm happy to answer more questions about that, but it's just a lot less hours overall. My effective hourly rate actually probably went up, even though I made a lot more as a lawyer, because just how many less hours overall that I work.
Right. And then there's just a quick follow-up question. You see that?
Yeah, the answer is yes, it is still hourly work.
Yeah, and the question just for the video, for the recording, is since you're about to become a detective, do detectives still work hourly too, or does that change the salary?
It's hourly still. I think that, obviously if major crimes happens, I may get called out more, and I have a much more normal schedule because you got to work during the business hours on the weekends.
Right. Great. Well, I think that does it for our presentation. Thank you so much, Inga, Nicole, and Dorian, for sharing. And thank you for all those who attended. Thank you, and y'all have a good night. Anything else, Ann?
Nope. Thank you all very much.
Okay.
And
All right.
these will be available if you want to watch them again. You guys are awesome. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
everyone. If you have any
Good
more
night.
questions, just hit me up on the email, which is in the chat.
Yeah, the emails, I think everyone put their emails in the chat, so capture those if you'd like to email anybody. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.